Did you know that a group of porcupines is called a prickle? It's funny because that's exactly how my legs feel after a few hours in the kayak. Welcome back to the Bass Fishing Playbook, and we're not talking about prickling anything besides bass on today's video. And today we're talking about a great cold water bait that you should start throwing in the fall that works really well all the way throughout the winter, especially if you have lakes and fisheries that stay open throughout the winter, but especially for your northern folk, it works up until you have ice, and immediately after ice out, it just excels in cold water. And the bait that I'm talking about here is one that you may have thrown, you may not have thrown, but it is a killer in cold water. That is the blade bait. Now, the blade bait is one that to many simply looks like a rattle trap. But to dumb it down for you guys, the blade bait is essentially like a lipless crankbait, but it's metal. And what that does is allows that bait to thump a lot harder. Now, you can go and catch some fish in the summer with it or in the spring, kind of like how you would with a trap, and reel it, and you're gonna get a large thump. You can catch them that way. It's a little sneaky deal, but the blade bait excels in colder water. We're gonna talk about why. We're gonna talk about how to throw them, and my two favorite setups to throw blade baits, my two favorite blade baits to throw in the fall and the winter months. As always in this episode, guys, if there's anything that I talk about that is linked to Omnia Fishing, it's gonna be down below in the description. You can use code SERIOUS10 to save 10% off. But if it's not on Omnia, of course, I'm gonna supply you guys links to everything that I talk about in today's video. So, the blade bait. This one right here specifically is the Binsky, a very, very, very popular blade bait made by a little small business called Fish Sense Lures. And like I said, it is metal. And so what you're gonna do is, it's a very, very thin profile with a lot of that weight being towards the front of the head, which allows you then to, as that bait falls, it's always going to land almost forward with that center of that weight being towards the front and belly of the head. And you're getting a couple different slots up here on top that allow you to have different angles of retrieve for that bait depending on what you're trying to do with it. And I'm gonna walk through my favorite ways to rig this, my favorite ways to fish it, and I'm gonna keep it very simple and straightforward for you guys so you can go out and catch fish immediately on a blade bait. And like I said, the blade bait is one you could go and cast and reel like you would a trap. You can go and cast it and yo-yo it, which is my favorite way to fish it, like a trap. And that is where I think the blade bait excels, is being yo-yoed or even vertically jigged. So we're gonna break down each one. The first one being, when you're casting this bait, you want to make sure your line tie is gonna be on one of these front two circles up here. That way, when you're ripping that bait, it's being led this way versus that way. And obviously, the further back you go, it's gonna change up your retrieve. But I like mine on that second spot right there. It's a very universal spot that you can use for vertical jigging, but also casting. But it's enough where when you're pulling that line, it allows that bait to face forward. And when you pull it, vibrates up and then shimmies back down. Again, just like a trap, but it hits a lot harder. That thump on the way up, that hits a lot harder than a trap. And so a lot of times in the fall, whether I'm fishing sand to rock transitions, drop-offs, targeting main lake points that have those steeper drops as those temperatures fall. And what I'll do is, say I'm on a main lake point, water temperatures are falling, they're getting in the 50 degrees, they're schooling heavy on bait. I'm gonna cast up on top of that point, especially I'm gonna target the steeper drops on the main lake point. I'm gonna look at a point or a hump, and I'm gonna find where the steepest drops of that topographic feature are. And essentially what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sit off of that feature and cast up on top of it. And then what I'm gonna do is let my blade bait fall down to the bottom. I'm gonna grab my reel and my line slack till I have it's almost taut, and I'm going to rip. And I'm talking like I'm taking my rod and I'm hitting it hard. Not a small lift. I like to rip it hard because that allows, one, reaction strike, two, allow the bait to hard. And that bolt, essentially for any lethargic bass that are on bottom, really gets them going. Now, if you find out they're being finicky or they're missing it on that harder thump or on that harder rip, is then you can go and slow down, let it hit bottom, reel in your line slack, and then do a smaller lift and that'll be do-do-do-do-do-do. Something smaller, if they're being a little bit finicky or bumping it when you're hitting it hard, you can change that, but really I like to get aggressive with the blade bait. And so what I'll do is as it's falling down, hit it, and then kind of give slack to my line, let it fall, hit bottom again, give it a second, hit it again. And so you always want to let it hit bottom before you go and rip it another time. And when I do that, typically I like to throw that on a spinning setup. I'm going to show you guys that right here, and there's a reason why when I'm casting like that I like to throw it on a spinning setup. So I like to just throw a simple 7-foot medium fast. This is a 13 fishing myth, 7-foot medium fast. We got a Shimano Nassie 10-pound braid, I believe that's X braid, to 8-pound fluorocarbon leader. And we have our blade bait on there, which we'll get into here in a second if it'll focus. That's an OSP, we'll talk about here in a second. But the reason I want to use a spinning setup is because when I'm casting, one, I'm gonna be able to make longer casts with that blade bait with a spinning setup. It's a lighter line, more finesse approach. But when I lift, and I try not to hit my ceiling in my garage, but when I lift, when as that bait's falling, that braided line is not only one gonna allow me to feel more, especially because a lot of your bites, especially right after you lift and you rip, they will eat it on the way down as it's shimming on the way down. And you can either, one, feel that better in your rod because of the braid, or watch your line jump better because of that braid. So my recommendation is throw it on a spinning rod. And you find that, one, you'll be able to maneuver and handle your blade bait at longer distances, but also be able to feel bites, even the most subtle of bites, better at longer distances. And the reason I got a little OSP blade bait on there is because it's smaller profile, a little bit harder to throw on casting gear. What you can see too is the OSP doesn't have your standard 3 treble hook. It's got these small little hooks on the side, almost kind of like frog hooks. And what that does, it does no treble here on the front. And so when you're bouncing that off rocks and on bottom, it's not going to get hung up when you go and lift it again, if that makes any sense. And it is a tiny, tiny little blade bait, which can be absolutely killer. I mean, it's pretty easy for them to inhale that. It's a 1/4 ounce, it's override from OSP. Give that little sucker a shot too, because it's great at not getting hung up, especially if you're fishing some rock and some structures that it could get into some nasty stuff. And the other way I like to fish, and hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you guys have comments on that below, but it's pretty straightforward. A lot of the grass this time of year, especially for us in the north, is dying off. Even if you do have grass, target some of those deeper grass lines. And a blade bait is a pretty easy one to snap out of grass too, if you do get it hung up in some vegetation on bottom. But for the most part, it is pretty straightforward of targeting hard bottom features. But my favorite way to catch them on a blade bait, so we got a 1/2 ounce Binsky right here. And what I'll make note of too is on the Binskies, you're gonna wanna swap out your treble hooks, because as you see, even that one right there is all bent, mangled. It's because those are stock trebles. The stock trebles are not the greatest, so I like to switch mine out. I usually go with Owner ST36s, or I go with one of my favorite ones, which is an Ichikawa light wire. Again, I'll link it down below for you guys, but I always swap out, especially like when I'm really being, serious type of deal and I wanna go catch them and make sure I'm landing them. I definitely swap out the trebles. Sometimes I get lazy, especially fishing with buddies, or just simply fun fishing, relaxing, and I'll throw just the stock. But that Binsky is freaking juice. They do love that thing. And so this is my favorite way to fish it, especially in deeper water when fish are getting really grouped up, they're cold, they're hunkered down, getting a boat on top of them in 20, 30, 40 plus foot of water. They're not gonna move. And basically you're vertical jigging. You're getting on top of them, and what you're doing is you are letting that bait go all the way down to the bottom, and you are sitting on top of them basically, if not maybe a 10, 20 foot pitch, and you are whack, whack. Like you are really like snapping that blade bait like crazy with that rod. And that's just, again, triggering that violent strike, that reaction strike of and that's gonna basically, you're gonna get the, and a bass is gonna come up, snap, and eat it as that bait stops ripping and falls down, or you'll hit it, and then they'll lock on the next time you go to rip. And so to do that, you need to have something that can take that blow. take that something that can take the brunt of that, leaning into that fish with the treble hooks. And so simply what I throw it on is my jerkbait setup. It's exactly what I throw it on. It's a Shimano X-Bride B. It's a 610 rod, 610 medium. You got a Shimano Bantam MGL on there, 10-pound Seaguar and VizX fluorocarbon. And of course, obviously we got the Binsky on there. But that is a wicked setup for ripping a blade bait, especially if you're vertical jigging. Definitely seems like, in this case, shorter the better when you're vertical jigging like that. But this, what it does, same kind of with a jerkbait, having that parabolic bend, is when you're snapping and you lean to them, you're gonna be able to have better hook penetration with the treble hooks at a longer distance, being that this setup is made for treble hooks. And it's almost a similar, if not the same action as you would with a jerkbait. So give that a rip too, if you're looking to vertical jig the blade bait. That right there, in a nutshell, is how you can get into throwing a blade bait. 2 different ways of throwing it, but really just get out there, target hard cover. This is the time of year to go to those more sharper breaks off of main lake features. Is when these fish are gonna start grouping up in bigger and bigger groups as the water temperatures get colder, and it's a great time to target that hard cover for those fish. You know, shoals, rock piles, hard bottom that's near sand on main lake points, things of that nature. It's where they're not gonna be back in the pockets as much anymore. They're gonna graduate out to more of that main lake stuff. And that's a great way not only to just go get bit, but get bit a lot. And basically put your, whether it's your kayak or your boat, put your trolling motor down, anchor down, whatever have you, and just catch fish after fish after fish. And a blade bait is a great way to do that and do that consistently. So throughout the fall, into the winter months, make sure you guys have a blade bait rigged up. If you got any questions, let me know down below. If you guys have a certain bait or technique you want me to talk about, comment that as well. Appreciate y'all for watching the Bass Fishing Playbook. Check out my other channel, Be the Fish, if you want to see some fishing action. Appreciate y'all, and we'll see you on the next one.